Okay, hello everybody. We are really happy to see you here. I'm Vasily Ключаев. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a head of and director of the Institute for Cognitive Neuroscience in Moscow. But today's session is very multidisciplinary. So we will have a very distinguished lecturers from different fields of science, and we will discuss a hypothetical no-stress city. But we will discuss it from very different perspectives. At the beginning, I will use 2 minutes of your time to introduce this session. So, our life in cities is associated with various stress factors. Yeah? And these factors can be physical stress factors, from noise to pollution, social stress factors, from inequality to high density of population, and so on and so on. Importantly, these stress factors, they can provoke stress. And moderate stress actually is associated with well-being. So people get a feeling of well-being under moderate stress, but heavy, prolonged stress can really induce serious problems. And not everybody knows that the probability to develop schizophrenia in large city is almost twice higher than in rural areas. Social stress can even produce effects on your brain, and we know that continuous stress can lead to shrinkage of some brain areas. So, for example, memory-related brain area hippocampus becomes smaller after continuous stress. So today we will discuss various factors, and I'm really happy to present you our presenters today. So we have 3 presenters: Dr. Mazda Adli, psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and director of the Mood Disorder Research Group in Charité Clinic, and leading expert in development and treatment of mood disorders. We also have here Елена Sautkina. She's a researcher from Welsh School of Architecture, and she's a distinguished expert in environmental and social factors of well-being. And I am really flattered to present you William Powers, a senior fellow from World Policy Institute, who is also adjunct professor in New York University, and I think he will present as a very interesting concept of bias-centric city. But we will start today by a talk of Dr. Mazda Adli. I'm really inspired by his research ideas, because Dr. Adli, not just a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, he also founder of a research forum on neurourbanism. And this is a very interesting research idea, because I think in the recent Lancet Psychiatry journal, Dr. Adli published a commentary paper on neurourbanism, suggesting that we have to focus on particular brain research to help urbanists to build a comfortable urban environment. I'm looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and thank you for your interest in this in the issue of stress in cities, which is a significant one, as I would say, and therefore we're sitting here to share our thoughts with you, and to see if something like a no-stress city is possible or even desirable. Well, the future of mankind on our planet is urban, and there's barely any alternative to this development, and we all are familiar to these figures. The number of people living in cities around the world is increasing. In 1950, a third of the world's population lived in cities. Today, it's a bit more than 50%, and by 2050, the year 2050, it will be 2/3 of the urban population that live in urban environments, according to the United Nations mathematical projections. The reason for this is evident, because cities are attractive. Urban populations do, in average, live under improved conditions. They have better access to education, better access to wealth, to general health care, particularly to mental health care. cities are positive stimulators for our individual developments, and they usually host the economic, political, scientific, and cultural power of nations. But at the same time, it seems as if there is a problem, because at least there's an ambivalent situation. City living, you have mentioned it, comes at an increased risk for some major psychiatric disorders. The risk for schizophrenia, we just heard that, is about twice as high in cities, with even a dose-response relationship for the size of the city and the amount of time one has grown up in the city, which is very indicative of a causal relationship. The risk for depression, by the way, is 1.5-fold for urban dwellers. The risk for anxiety disorders is 1.2-fold, as epidemiological data show. And these risk differences remain stable even if we control for other risk factors for these diseases, like social or genetic or personality-related risk factors. And that points towards a causal role of city living. And neuroscientific data from imaging studies, in fact, show an altered brain activity of healthy urban dwellers in response to social stress. In fact, stress seems to play a crucial role here, particularly social stress, which is that type of stress which may result when people live together within the within the limits of a shared space. When we live when we live or grow up urban, our brains respond stronger to social stress. That's what we find in imaging studies, which shows that we are more sensitive towards it, which again may be comparable to something like a training effect. But in individuals who carry other risk factors, for example for schizophrenia, higher stress exposure may not train but may converge with other risk factors and result in the disease. According to the hypothesis of my working group, the major contributors to urban social stress, which influences our mental health, is social density. That means overcrowding or the lack of private space, and social isolation, which is, for example, social exclusion, the experience of being discriminated against, or loneliness. If the two stressors, density and isolation, act simultaneously, the effect may become toxic and result in stress-related mental disorders, as I just mentioned. Given that more and more people will be living urban, we therefore urgently need a public mental health action plan for urban environments. This is actually what I would like to call to. Besides more research and research funding to investigate how urban stress gets under the skin, we need effective ways to address social stress in cities. For example, by controlling the experience of social density and by providing enough room for social interaction and cohesion to counteract social isolation. This is why we need public spaces in our cities, although space in the densely populated city centers becomes dramatically expensive these days. But they have a public health function. Such a public mental health strategy for cities must be developed in a joint approach, I would say, of mental health experts and neuroscientists together with urban researchers, city planners, architects and government authorities. A while ago, I proposed the term neurourbanism. That was in that Lancet psychiatry article for such an approach. And we therefore have established such an interdisciplinary working group in Berlin, which connects psychiatry, psychology, city planning, architecture, and urban sociology to a collaborative network, because I think it's the right time to connect our worlds. Thank you.
I suggest that we first restrict questions, so I will ask 1 or 2 questions to our presenters. At the end of the session, we will have a general discussion, and you will feel free to ask any question, okay? So right now, perhaps I will ask 1 question. That's more methodological question. How do you differentiate in your research the effects of cities on health and so-called social drift effects, when special groups of people actually move to special areas in the cities, and perhaps special people go to special urban areas and get special mental disorders? How do you differentiate these effects from causal effects of cities on health?
Yes, that's in fact a crucial question, because there's the causation hypothesis on the one hand, which states that city living causes mental ill health, versus the selection hypothesis, which would state that people at risk for mental disorders rather move into the cities because they hope to find better healthcare, for example. And just this month, it was published in JAMA Psychiatry, which is a very honorable journal, that people that live in denser areas of cities tend to carry more genetic risk factors for schizophrenia, and which kind of goes into towards the selection hypothesis. But I think both is true, causation and selection and social drift. We do find dose response relationship, for example, for the amount someone has grown up in a city, or the size of the city, a dose response relationship which results in actually schizophrenia later as an adult. Such a dose-response relationship is very, very indicative for causation. But still, there is, of course, people who are mentally unstable or are at risk, probably also drift into cities. Both is true, and both hypotheses apply, and it's not easy to differentiate.
Thank you very much. I think we can continue this discussion at the end of our session. And now we can move to our second presenter, to William Powers. We will need slides, and I give you your clicker. I'm really fascinated by the research topics of William, because he's not only well known for his environmental initiatives. He works at World Policy Institute, but he also lived in a minimalist lifestyle in North Carolina and New York City, and even published a book about his experience. And I think today I expect to hear about his interesting concept of biocentric city, that for some psychologists is quite controversial area in a sense, because you sometimes promote the idea of minimalist lifestyle. And there is a controversy in the literature about the link between wealth and well-being. There are some well-known paradoxes, like Easterlin paradox, showing no correlation between GDP and well-beings of citizens in different countries. On the other hand, there is a growing literature linking wealth and happiness. So I wonder, how do you cope with this problem? And I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm going to look at this in the context of a non-anthropocentric point of view, not just humans at the center of the show, but other species. There are 30 million species on the planet, and we're just one of them. That's what's called biocentrism. And a biocentric city puts us as Homo sapiens, as mammals, as humans, back into habitats, even in an urban environment. So that's the kind of topic I want to get at. And it's building a little bit on what Mazda was talking about in terms of social stress and density and isolation, which I think is linked to not living in a biocentric context. So as we know, we're living in this situation where it would take 5 planets of resources if every citizen on the planet were to live like an average American. And these are the planets. In my own city of New York, this is the type of superstorm that's been hitting. Hurricane Sandy that actually drove my students at NYU out of the university for 10 days. Our apartment had no electricity. I mean, did anyone see the President of Mexico's speech this afternoon at the plenary where he talked about some of the other superstorms? Were you there at the plenary today? Yeah, he gave a lot more images about that. We all know about climate change. And Vasily mentioned some of the research is controversial, but there is a lot of research showing that, you know, as you increase kind of GDP over time or economic growth, you don't necessarily get more happiness. This is a Gallup study, the most prestigious poll in the US, showing that over a 40-year period, the people who identified themselves as very happy with their lives remained constant, even though the economy grew greatly. These are just a few pieces of it. The biocentric city, you know, is not just being in our analytical mind, but in what cultural ecologist David Abram calls the more than human world. Okay, this is a sensuous world of textures, sights, sounds, sensory perceptions. So when the ex-president of Mexico talked today about technological solutions to the climate crisis, yes, those are possible, right? But maybe there's a deeper way. And the main thing I'd like you to take away from this, from my point of view today, is that there's a deeper level beneath the green techno response to climate change. And that has to do with something much deeper, which begins with questioning the very term, sustainable development. Now, if I were to ask you, what is sustainable development, what would you say? Audience participation, what's sustainable development? Okay, there's not going to be time for a real answer. But there's, you know, this is the typical UN graph chart, where if you balance the social, economic, and environmental aspects, you get sustainability in the middle, right? This is thrown around. This is what I think of that particular rubric. I don't agree with it. I believe that the economic and social spheres are actually inside of Gaia, as James Lovelock calls it, or the living earth, and that we need to have this more humility as to our place in it. The anthropologist Gudinas talks about buen vivir, which, have you heard of vivir bien or buen vivir from Latin America, this idea of living well, that well-being is only possible in the context of a community. And by the way, that community is not just social, it's also ecological. That is the key to the Andean and Amazonian point of view, and it's one of the lessons from the Global South that's been filtering up, I think, to our world. And this is just like a little idea that I'm playing with right now for this new book I'm writing. But basically, you know, the individual is a consumer. Yes, we're a consumer, right? But actually, there's a deeper level to who we are as individuals, which is textured, layered, and unique, and also one with the whole. Right? And you can just think of it just in terms of the fact that every single person, almost 8 billion of us, is different, right? And yet, almost like any other species, there's 8 billion of us almost like in a hive, or we work as a community, we work in a social manner, right? So it's these two things at once, and this is part of the richer concept of the individual. And please, let's look at Bill Plotkin's work, the depth psychologist from the United States, who talks about, you know, the human being as psychological and ecological, but not cultural or religious, right? We're psychological in terms of archetypes, our relationship with our identity, and so forth, that firm identity of who we are. And we're also territorial. We live in a certain habitat, and that can be urban as well. But these cultural and religious artifices that are created, those are anthropocentric impositions and theories on our essential nature. One little piece of theory, sorry, I don't want to just, this is very necessary. Like, there's an assumption among most people that the neoliberal paradigm, the idea of laissez-faire capitalism, or even its offshoot of human development, the fact that we should bring people into development, is the only perspective. But, you know, as we've seen from a lot of the rich academic literature, they're actually biocentric and post-development perspectives. So biocentrism is an ethical point of view that says that no, all living things have a right to exist and are important. And the growing field of ecopsychology is focusing on basically E.O. Wilson's hypothesis of biophilia, that we connect innately with the environment. In terms of post-development, you've probably heard of Arturo Escobar and this work. This is basically looking at the fact that, you know, it's not just one approach, it's hybridity. There's bottom-up approaches to development. I think that this is another one of the assumptions we need to be questioning. The fact that there's one way of doing cities, becoming a global city. And there's one way of being happy. So this is an idea that, progress and development are up for a question. And we need to explore those topics more deeply. So really, to kind of wrap it up, because I know we have limited time, how do we get to this biocentric city that I'm talking about? Well, I sometimes think it's like giving us a compass. It's like, a lot of times in the cities, we're kind of looking at things through this narrow 20-degree focus of almost like a hunter looking forward with our analytical minds ruling, whereas this entire world around us of 360 degrees. So in my book, New Slow City, I talk about individual practices. One of them is looking up. If you're walking around Moscow, look up every once in a while. You'll see the trees, maybe the gleam of lights on a windowsill, the sky, all of these aspects that are right there around you in the city. In terms of the communal level, the West turning on the compass, the street and the neighborhood. I'll give you two examples of way to re-tribe within cities. One is the Transition Initiative. Have you heard of the Transition Network? You can look at their website. Basically, there's transition streets. These are blocks that form block parties. They'll block off the road for like a day at a time to kind of form more community. They'll plant gardens together. It's a way of forming more community and sense of community in a city. And secondly is rooftop farming. Some of my students from NYU created this. This is Brooklyn Grange, or if you're looking at this view right here. Brooklyn Grange is a viable business where they're providing 40 restaurants in Manhattan with organic food while working outside on the top of the Standard Oil building. Secondly, if we go to the north, the 360 city, this is just what we've been talking about in all the different panels here, this idea that the city itself can be greener, can be more of a habitat for other mammals and so forth, and other species. But let's take it a little further, because if you have like a centered, biocentric individual, on the one hand, in community, in a transition street, farming in the city, the policies and programs that will naturally come into urban planning will be more inclusive. And will be more exciting and more organic. And finally, to wrap it up, there's education. So the new education is these types of facilities, looking at metacognition, watching the way that we think, stepping out of our naturally narcissistic, like anthropocentric view of the world into something bigger, biocentric awareness, teaching that through experiential learning, through children and even adults connecting more with the physical world around them. And finally, bolstering institutions that are doing this, like Schumacher College in England and other places that are, working towards this other type of way of planning. And I think with these idea, hopefully we'll have a little bit of a compass to kind of move forward and think more generally in this panel about these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. I got a lot of questions, but I will limit myself to one. We will come back to those questions at the end of this session. I mean, this country is very special. So the concept of the green city was very popular here in early 20s and 30s. But this concept completely failed. So you will now find some ruins of the green cities somewhere in Moscow, in some suburbs. It was an ideal concept, and it didn't work. So what can we learn from the past, from the history, to ensure that we can build this ideal biocentric city?
Well, one clarification is I don't think there's an ideal biocentric city. There's no blueprint, only a compass that can guide us. Every single country you go to, I just arrived from Bolivia yesterday, South America, is different. Culturally, economically, socially. And each context has to respond to this creative globalization space however they're going to do. So if you're going to take a model like a green city or a smart city and plop it down in Russia, it's not necessarily going to work. So this idea of post-development is that you look at the local resources. For example, there could be even what Putin was talking about this morning, regional development and so forth. Not even regional development, go to even more local level. It's called localization. Localization is not going to the past. It's turning around and taking a step forward. It's a 180 forward approach where you actually look at this vast amount of scientific progress that we have and academic knowledge and so forth, but we also look back to the ancestral knowledge that exists and so forth. And I could picture 1,000 different solutions just in Russia, communities up in Siberia, around St. Petersburg and different places, all having their different localized solutions, of course, within a global context.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now we move to our third speaker, to Елена Sautkina. She is from Welsh Institute for Architecture, and I'm really happy that Елена accepted an invitation from my university in Moscow. I'm looking forward to see Елena here. And she's a leading expert and researcher in environmental psychology. And we will here talk about different factors affecting well-being in urban areas. And I think I'm looking forward to this interesting new holistic approach. So, for example, in our laboratory, we focus on the effects of greenery. And we know that large green areas in the city, they can promote health. And they have actually very different effects from green exercises, and 5 minutes of exercises in green areas can seriously modulate your blood pressure, even your brain waves. We know that green areas affect mood, attention, and so on. But that is an example of a very focused study on a particular factor affecting well-being in the cities. And I'm looking forward for Yelena's talk about a holistic approach, how to build a friendly, modern city.
Thank you, Vasily. I'll try to be as holistic as possible, but actually I wanted to depart from a statement that cities are complex adaptive systems. We have to see them in this way. They're included in a global network of region, planet, country, planet. So it's probably normal that urban stress that we're talking about today is also a complex problem that is combined, as it has been already mentioned. It includes many different factors. So we're not facing something that is easily removable, if we want to speak in these terms. But actually, we need to see the picture a little bit from the point of view not only of removing urban stressors, but also using the opportunities that are contained in urban environments, because as again it has been mentioned already, urban cities are centers of culture. They provide us with a tremendous wealth. You know, our civilization is basically based on cities today, as we know. So how can we use these possibilities, and also how can we use these possibilities, those same possibilities that we are actually addressing here as stressors, so like urban density, noise, you know, all kind of overpopulation and so on. So can we actually consider them in terms of opportunities as well? So here comes environmental psychology, in sense of that it talks a lot about restorative environments, and one of the theories that is based upon is attention restoration theory. Basically, it means that we have two types of attention. One is voluntary attention. So when we have to read something or watch something, we use an effort. This is our voluntary attention. And involuntary attention, this is something when we still know what is happening, but we are relaxed. And this second type of attention is very much present when we are, well, if you practice mindfulness, you will be doing that for sure. And if you will be in the nature, in a relaxed setting, you know, if you'll be in a holiday, if you will be involved in, if you're involved in leisure activities, you're practicing that too. So if we cannot, you know, be on holiday or be meditating, you know, all our time, then we have also to create probably environments that facilitate the recovery from these factors that we are facing in the cities. And this is not only, you know, the case of big cities, but also smaller ones, because our environments are gradually more and more urbanized. And today and yesterday we were hearing a lot about the fact that more and more cities will become not only unicenter, unipolar systems, but multipolar. And we're talking about creating also something bigger on the outskirts and something more livable, so like almost like micro cities. So Restoration has 4 factors, which is just mentioned them briefly, but you can use them. I know there are many designers here and architects. This is something that you can use in your work for sure. One is one quality of restorative environment is the feeling of being away, so away from your tasks basically. So like holiday and so on. Another one is a soft fascination. So it's something that is aesthetically pleasing, that is interesting, that is creative, fun. So you can see what it is. The third one is extent. So the expanse, the space, the openness, which can also be understood in different ways. And the fourth one is you are engaged in the activities that you really want to. So these 4 principles can be very easily used in the cities, and it's really nice to see that we're talking at this forum a lot about making cities better and not just about profit. I was a little scared. I didn't know exactly what to expect. It's my first time at the forum, but I'm extremely pleased by the fact that we're talking about sustainability, ecology, and making really our cities more livable, more equitable, and so on. So just to wrap this up a little bit, we can really use the possibilities in the cities in terms of density, that we can communicate more. These places can allow us to communicate more. So why don't we create in those same outskirts that are completely empty nowadays, at least speaking about Moscow now, seeing how it is, but also having lived in other big cities, that's the problem. Like in Europe, that's a very frequent problem, that only the city center has some kind of socially restorative infrastructure, whereas outskirts don't have as much, and they also don't have such an attractive environment and so on. So we can see these kind of things as well. Then we can also think in terms of like not only removing stressors, but creating conditions, building these more pleasing, more user-friendly spaces. Like you were showing in your presentation, greener spaces, so green walls, green, not just, it has to include these 4 aspects that I've mentioned. They're really important. They're really the core of my talk, I think. So when you see the mosses on the walls, is that really restorative? Well, you have to go through the checklist and see by yourself. I'm not going to comment, but you can do that, You can also see the park outside, Zaryadye Park. In my personal opinion, that's a more restorative environment. It provides you with a lot of those things. You can do what you want. You feel a little bit like on a holiday. You are in a pleasing environment, and you are in an open space. So there is a lot that I could also say, but maybe the last thing is that, of course, we have to, look at the clean air. So every factor that is important for our health, we have to look at. But psychological health in the city can be really promoted through better quality environments, and this has to be done not only in the city centers, but in the outskirts as well. And less well-off cities, we have to help them to learn from the experience of big cities, because probably they don't have the same opportunities as we do. And finally, the solution to urban stress is not a uniform or kind of silver bullet thing. We have to consider things from various angles, and most importantly, I think we need to involve in planning. Please, young people, remember this and do this as much as you can. Work across professions, work across sectors as much as you can, work across ages, involve population, so do involve public participation. As a bonus, you will have not public protests and kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard sort of reaction, but you will have people involved in this process in a civilized way, and you can really communicate with each other, and you can find a much better solution to anything that we're doing, because we create cities and cities create us, so we have to work together. That's all for me.
Elena, thank you so much. So I will use this opportunity to ask one question, and we'll move to the general discussion. I have a question related to some of the points you made. I also like the topic of this forum, but for example, when I look to some of the projects presented here, some real estate projects, huge buildings with lack of greenery, lack of social space, I'm a bit depressed. And do you know anything about cross-cultural differences in people's reaction to these stressors? So I think some of this project will be very stressing for European inhabitants, but the Russian audience doesn't react negatively to this very strange new urban areas, let's say, around Moscow.
This is a very interesting question, and what seems to me at the moment is that Russia has a huge fascination. Modern Russia has a huge, probably in the past as well, the industrial past, has a huge fascination by technologies and artificial sort of things. I mean, we are also a very creative nation, so it doesn't probably mean that, that we will be using this in a bad way, and we hopefully can learn from the mistakes of the past, because what we built in the past, the post-war housing was a disaster everywhere, in Russia as well as in other places. In the West, we have learned from this at least 2 decades ago. In Russia, this is not happening yet, I agree. There are still areas that are constructed, just by a place that I was in a few days ago. They are building 2 huge towers, like 30-story buildings, by a train station, just because the city is congested, and so nobody can move out of the city easily, so they have to build these towers by the train station. There is no infrastructure, there is very little space, and I think this is going to be a stressful environment for sure. So I hope we'll be quick at learning, and I hope that the ideas that have been discussed at this forum, they will be also quickly penetrating these processes, that this can be, like a flagship a little bit for the urban policy in the country, hopefully.
Thank you so much. And now we can move to questions. I can moderate the discussion. I also have some questions, but perhaps audience have questions and our participants have questions. So any questions? I can bring you a microphone. So while you are trying to ask some questions, perhaps I will ask some questions. So, for example, can I ask William a question? Let's say behavioral economics suggested that we have this inherited very natural internal conflict between some pro-social, less egoistic motivations and the very kind of economic egoistic motivations. And it looks like, at least from behavioral economics, that's a very natural conflict inside of us. What do you think, which factors can promote, let's say, more pro-social, biocentric behavior? How can we promote it in modern cities?
There's 3 ways. One has to do with spiritual or philosophical background, just pursuing some kind of a spiritual practice in a city or a town where you're getting more in touch with mindfulness, with the present moment awareness, meditation, those types of practices are preferable. Or even within the mainstream religions, there are contemplative practices that get you closer. The second is encouraging community. I sometimes use the word tribe. I like tribe better than community because it suggests this kind of very organic link with other people. So any policies that promote getting people together. One is the 3-day work week that they've instituted in some countries. Some companies are playing with the 6-hour work week in Sweden. Shorter work experiences is linked to more time with family, more time together. And the third is looking at our paradigm. Really getting the educational institutions to go beyond just giving technical fixes and short-term solutions, and even all these wonderful new, green economics and, the projects that we're seeing in this forum, but also getting into, where is happiness really for us? Getting us to think more deeply, to become more philosophical about the way that we're living.
Thanks a lot. Feel free to ask any question. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Paulina. I'm from Moscow. I'm born here and I live here. And the subject of today is very, I respond to it very much, so it's my problem also, the stress in my day-to-day life. I have a question for Mazda. You talked about the stress that in the risk of stress is much higher in cities than in land areas. And the question is, the people that move to cities, they want to achieve big goals. I'm always having this feeling that the people in big cities, they need some big achievements to feel happy. And afterwards, if I'm running towards these achievements, I get very stressed, and in the end, I am not happy anymore. And when I try, now I'm talking about myself, and when I've achieved my goal, I have no goal to achieve, I'm not happy neither. So maybe this is, I don't know where to find this solution between big goals, big achievements, a career, and what our education wants from us, and the city wants from us, and this low level of stress and slow life.
Well, good question, and I think what you address is something what I would call the mentality of the urban dweller, put in a stereotype maybe. He's, the urban dweller who is more competitive, who is striving for success, etc. Well, I mean, there are many people that find that attractive, or even seek cities because they find an environment for exactly these values. So this is something that we probably have to accept about people who live in cities, in average, and then the question is, well, how can I sort of balance these mentality related sides of the city and with good stress coping? Well, that's really something that I would say is dependent on the individual. How to cope with urban stress. It's good to be aware of that. Cities are a bit more stressful places. People that live in cities even walk faster than people in rural areas, and that's a fact. And so it's the ambivalence that you're addressing of cities, but that's also, I would say, the beauty, because cities offer two things. There are probably also more yoga studios and meditation centers in cities than in rural environments.
Okay, I see also there is a question there.
Okay, thank you. My name is Andrei Avanesov. I'm the professor of Moscow State University of International Affairs. But at the same moment, now I'm responsible for public relations for Moscow renovation program. So my question is, we have two types of target groups in this program. The guys who are living from the old buildings to the new buildings, and they are we call them participants of the renovation. But the other target group is the neighbors of the renovation program. So the first people, they get something from the renovation because they are moving to the better facilities. But the other target group, they doesn't get anything at the moment. At the end of the program, everybody will have the nice environment around because it will be the legacy of the of this program. But at this very moment, this neighborhood, these neighbors, they feel themselves a little bit frustrated because they getting noise, they getting dirt around, but they don't have the new houses for them because they live in the other kind of houses which are not at the program at this very moment. So do you have any cases of your experience we can afford these people something to make them happy? The neighbors of the renovation.
So I think
program.
a general question, so perhaps some of you can comment.
Yeah, it's for any one of you guys. Is it clear for you? Is my
Yes,
question
I
is
think,
clear?
yeah.
Okay.
Is-
Yeah, it's complicated, I know, so that's why I'm here to ask it.
Elena can comment.
I will try. Probably communication, to be clear in terms of timescales that this construction will take, about the advantages that they will receive. Trying to transform, I know this is like construction side basically, trying to shield it as much as possible so that it's not, visibility is really important. Like
Visibility.
Yes, visibility. There are studies in terms of NIMBY, not in my backyard. One of the main things is the visibility of the object, of whatever is happening, like water purification plants, for example, is one of the studies of my colleagues. So try to beautify the environment as much as you can. That would be the suggestion. Yeah, noise, of course. If there's any possibility to shield from.
Give them, like in the plane, things for the.
Maybe not, but maybe like whatever you can do to. I think in Moscow the construction is often done in horrific ways compared to how it's done in the West. It's really in the middle of people's lives and everyone is cursing.
But what to do with the jealousness? Because these people they
They are
feel jealous to the people who are moving to the new houses.
Yeah, but then they will be next, right?
No.
They won't be.
No, they won't be.
They won't be at all.
They're just neighbors.
I
Maybe
see,
someday
yeah.
in the next life,
Oh,
but
okay.
they're not in the
I
program.
understood that everyone will
We
benefit
have
at the
million
end.
participants of the program, but we have 3 million of people who are near, because 2 million of these people, they are just neighbors of
Yeah.
the participants, and they feel jealous that they are not moving, and they're nervousing, of course,
Yeah,
because they
then-
have all these bad things around.
Then forget about, you have to give them time scales and everything. Basically, people have to feel in control of what is happening as much as possible. They have to have the perceived control over the situation. How long this will last, what this will give, how will it affect me at the end as well. Then in addition to, trying to create as much to beautify the environment, that remove a little bit, shield a little bit. And also if there is any possibility to improve the area as well as part of this process, permanently, not like just a temporary solution for this construction site, but also to give them a little bit to their space, like build a new something, like a playground or something like this, but really, good quality, nice, so that it corresponds. The worst thing is that if you have two areas which go through the same process together somehow, but you give a better thing to ones and not to the others, then that creates a little bit of a problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lena. I think I really enjoyed your report on the behavioral effects of the introduction of this 5p price for plastic bags in Britain. It was very interesting to read how people respond to this policy and actually adjust on behavior. So with certain tricks, actually, you can really help people. You can also chat with behavioral economists, perhaps. Other questions?
May I have?
Реплику. Да.
Well, actually, a bit of feedback which I cannot hear without the microphone. I'm so sorry. Well, I think that the main stressor in the city is the fact that we have to commute to work. I think the main stressor for people living in the city is the fact that they have to commute to work. And the minute that I didn't need to go to work anymore, to commute to work anymore, I started feeling much less stress, to tell you the truth. And what we have been talking about, a smart city, basically, it will reduce the stress, because that fact that I have to be stuck in a traffic jam for 2 hours, or I have to sit on a bus or in a public public transportation for 3 hours. This is something that kills me. I think that if we give people opportunity to work remotely, to work out of home, people will spend more time with their families, and therefore they will de-stress.
The major stress factor in the city is traffic and necessity to move to your office and spend a lot of time in traffic. Do you agree with this? Waste of time. So, do you agree that, let's say, when people will have, how to call it, freelance work at home, it will change life. So people will not spend the rest of their life in traffic.
Well, there is. Do you have a headphone? There is a yes and no to this question. Yes, we do know that people who have to commute long times in their cars are enormously stressed. Car drivers in the rush hour in cities even have stress responses that are comparable like military pilot jets when flying. So that's true. But it's also well shown in studies that it depends on how you commute to work. If you use the public transport system, you're a little bit better off and you're much happier than the car driver. If you even can go by bike or walk, you're among the happiest. When people work alone at home, home office, it's not only positive because they lack social support at their workplace. We do find a lot of work quality for people who work in their offices and being supported by a team structure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the session. My name is Maya. I'm an urban planner and researcher from Moscow, and I've got questions to all of the speakers. The question is, are mostly all of visitors of the Moscow Urban Forum this year, previous year, years ago, know what is the risk of the stressful living in urban zones? And not only us know this paradigm and so on. My question is, how do you participate in real urban planning projects and so on? And what is the way you are involved in them, if you are? Thank you.
So we can start one by one, Yelena.
Not necessarily involved, but sort of observing this for about 20 years. My practice area would be more policy related rather than being directly involved in. However, yes, there was a case in Glasgow, in the city of Glasgow, when there was a long-term renovation program, and we were looking at tenure mix, mixing together homeowners and social renters, so those who live on benefit and receive state benefit and live in rented homes, with very low sort of prices. I looked at renovation in these terms, and also putting to leave these residents close together and see whether people who live in on benefit, whether they can get some social learning in terms of jobs, in terms of schooling and so on, whether this process of tenure mixing can actually improve their socioeconomic situation or not. But the answer is complex, actually. Yeah.
William?
One of the ways is working with a transition town in Bolivia called Samaipata, creating one of the 24 eco-municipalities in that country. These are municipal systems that are prioritizing clean energy, access to organic agriculture, and local economies. And we did a study that I led which showed that at 1/17th US GDP and 1/17th the carbon footprint of an average American, there are happiness levels, according to the Gross National Happiness Survey, 25% higher than in those countries. And it had to do with all of those factors: extended families, and strong sense of community, walkability, and being able to bike. Only 5% of people have cars in this town, and so forth. So it's almost a post-development solution that's naturally achieving some of those factors that we're trying to get to in the West. A lot of the German towns that are pushing towards this model already exist throughout the global South. So I've been more involved in those types of urban situations.
And Dr. Adli?
Well, I'm a university researcher, and this is rather the context where I work. But we try to bridge the gap towards urban researchers on the one hand. This is why we have developed this neuro-urbanistic research group, and on the other hand, we try to reach out to our urban municipal government in Berlin, to the health section and to the city development section, and involve them into our group, and they're also sitting with us at the table, and together we're trying to develop recommendations that derive out of our stress research, for example.
Thank you so much. I think we have to finish now. You can approach some of the speakers and ask their questions. Just to conclude, perhaps I can say that this problem, the stress in the city, looks like as a very multidisciplinary problem, and it looks like we have to use various approaches from social sciences, economics, medicine, even neuroscience, psychology, to cope with this. And I think it would be a nice outcome of our session to promote this kind of studies also in this country and in this city. Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation, and dear guests, thank you very much.